Yes, thank you. So, hello everyone. When Ben invited me to speak at this conference, my first thought was, well, how can I say no to this invitation? And that is because concepts and subjectivities relating to the motive of becoming godlike, and even dare I say, becoming God, are at the heart of many styles of Hindu spirituality. And to return to Professor Headley's comment at the beginning of the symposium, this is the satanic temptation in Christian thought. Now, Swami Vivekananda, whom you see there, a Hindu monk who brought certain ideas of yoga to the West in the late 19th century, scandalized his American audiences by declaring, "You are all God." And I say scandalized because such a statement would have blatantly contravened what is sometimes called the Protestant principle. That is the qualitatively infinite distance between creator and created. Now, Swami Vivekananda is speaking in English. In his original Sanskrit context, the statement may have sounded something like what you see there, I am Atma Brahma. Precisely how to understand this somewhat cryptic statement is an intensely debated topic in styles of Hindu theological exegesis called Vedanta. Does it mean this soul is God, full stop? Or does it mean this soul is related to God? Or does it mean this soul is dependent on God? More precisely, do we have a communion between the human and the divine, or a complete unity? And I chose this statement, I am Atma Brahma, partly because it happens to be an epigraph in one of David Bentley Hart's books. Now we can spend several days, if not several months, trying to answer these types of questions in their original Sanskritic Vedantic context. On this occasion, since I have around 45 minutes, is that right? I have 45 minutes? 40 minutes? 45 minutes. This is how I'm going to proceed. I will first sketch two major Vedantic styles of understanding that declaration. This Atman is Brahman from the 8th and the 11th centuries CE. Then I will jump across the centuries and discuss how the Bengali poet thinker Rabindranath Tagore, and those are his dates, 1861 to 1941, both receives and recalibrates these pre-modern Vedantic vocabularies in his devotional music. And as we will see, the processes of recovering our true identity as rooted in the divine reality, that is Theosis, involves a dynamic process of reciprocity, a dynamic process of playfulness. We recover the infinite within our finitude only to seemingly lose the infinite. This seeming loss of the infinite is followed by another recovery. This recovery is followed by another seeming loss, and so on and on and on in a cosmic spiral of playful interrelationality between the human lover and the divine beloved. So let's begin with Vedanta. The multiple theological, hermeneutic, exegetical worlds of Vedanta seek to systematize a vast corpus of scriptural texts, such as the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita. And these texts often seem to speak in discordant voices, and the task of a Vedantic theologian is to skillfully recalibrate them towards a hermeneutic symphony. And one crucial challenge in the light of the question, what is really real, Satyam, is to interweave texts which seem to negate empirical multiplicity with texts which seem to clearly affirm it. And a key text of Vedantic exegetical reflection on how the supreme indivisible source, Eka, is concretely manifested through the world of divisibility is a set of declarations from the Chandogya Upanishad you see on that slide. My dear, in the beginning, this was being alone, one only without a second. And this being, which is indivisible unicity, thought, may I become many, may I grow forth. And the multiple enterprises of Hindu hermeneutics generated a spectrum of worldviews, such as the trans-theistic non-duality of Shankara. So that's roughly the 9th or the 8th century CE, and the theistic non-duality of Ramanuja around the 11th century, 12th century. And across these multiple Vedantic forms of psychology, epistemology, and cosmology, we repeatedly encounter the theme that the spiritual quest involves the cultivation of the sacred science, Vidya, where knowing one's true deep self, Atman, is concurrent with reorientation to the fabric of ultimate reality, Brahman. Through this discipline of Vidya, an individual realigns oneself with the pre-existing symbiotic synergies or bandhu between the inner self and the world at large. And empowered by these revitalized correspondences, the individual begins to re-envision the world not simply as a terrifying domain of ignorance, suffering, and impermanence or samsara, but as continuously suffused with the power of being, Brahman. I have conceptually paraphrased the term Bandhu as symbiotic synergy. But the word Bandhu, like the English word bond and bondage, literally means a connection, so a ligature between the finite and the non-finite. And this is why, to return to a phrase of Professor Margaret Barker yesterday, in many Hindu universes, holiness is presented as contagious. It spreads rapidly through these ligatures or these sinews. Thus, in a famous narrative from the Chandogya Upanishad, you see there, a father instructs his son, Shwetaketu, about the imperceptible essence that structures everything by asking him to cut the seeds of a banyan tree to see what lies within. When the son replies that he cannot ultimately see anything, the father declares that which is the subtle essence, this whole world has for its own true self, and that is the self. And pointing to the sun, he says very cryptically, "You are that, Swataketu." And that cryptic, enigmatic phrase, Tattvam Asi, becomes the generative matrix of various Vedantic lineages, with every major tradition developing its own formulations of the terms Tat, that, and Tvam, you. So reading the word Tat as applying or referring to Brahman, the divine reality, and Tvam as referring to Atman, the spiritual principle, one has the somewhat daunting hermeneutic task of delineating the relation between the two. That is the referent of the syntactical connector Asi, R. Now, according to Ramanuja, the term Atman refers to the individual self, the soul, roughly speaking, the I, which is both ontologically real and existentially dependent on the supremely personal Brahman. Ramanuja seeks to simultaneously affirm that there is a non-duality or an Advaita between Atman and Brahman is qualified or characterized, Vishishta, by the self, Atman. Here is an analogy which would be that of multicolored fishes of different species swimming through the deep sea. On the one hand, the water-full fishes are vitally dependent on the seawater for their existence, and on the other hand, the sea is characterized in distinctive ways by the presence of these very fishes and not others. A different analogy, drawing on a song from the Beatles, would be that of the yellow submarine in the heart of the ocean. The submarine is dependent on the circumambient waters, but the submarine is also a distinct entity in its own right. In contrast, according to Shankara, the term Atman intimates the non-individuated eternal self that is non-dual Advaita with the ineffable Brahman, which is the transpersonal absolute beyond all names, forms, descriptions, and qualities. An analogy would be the chemical equivalence water is the molecular structure H2O. So here water is not an attribute or a quality or a characteristic of H2O. Rather, whatever water is substantially, essentially H2O and vice versa. Now, against this conceptual backdrop, let me introduce the term Vaishnava Vedanta. This refers to to Vedanta style inquiries in a form of religious Hinduism called Vaishnavism. How do you move? You got stuck there. Okay, yes, that's the term there. Now, here the divine reality Brahman is the supremely beautiful, supremely adorable personal reality called Vishnu or Krishna. And it is here that we encounter the central motive of Leela. The term Leela defies straightforward translation into English. Its meaning range across play, playfulness, sport, beauty, charm, grace, and so on. So instead of trying to translate the Sanskrit word into English, for every translation is already an interpretation, let me indicate the theological problem that the invocation of Leela is trying to address. In various styles of Hindu devotional poetry, the dialectic of the presence of God and the absence of God is worked out with a rich spectrum of symbolic tools, narrative styles, and ritual expressions. The dialectic is shaped by two opposing strands. So first, Because Brahman, the divine reality, is universally present in every finite reality, Brahman is supremely accessible to us. To find Brahman, one does not have to travel to the far reaches of the Milky Way. One turns inwards meditatively or ecstatically to the interiority of one's spiritual depth, Atman. And in the characteristic languages of devotion, bhakti, in Vaishnava Vedanta, the supremely personal Brahman, Krishna, or Vishnu, who is the governor of the cycles of transmigration, samsara, is simultaneously accessible to the devotees. Whether as their little child throwing a tantrum, their mischievous friend grazing cows, or their bewitchingly beautiful lover dancing with them, as you see in that picture. So all of that is the first. Second, however, human beings who are marked by various kinds of worldly privations cannot encapsulate or comprehend the plenitude of Vishnu, of Krishna, of Brahman. Thus, throughout Vaishnava devotional literature, we find repeated reminders that the seemingly human Krishna is not just another child, not just another friend, not just another lover. And these reminders are often phrased with the language of Leela. From the perspective of Vaishnava Vedanta, Leela provides a conceptual pathway to try to move away from two types of viewpoints regarding divine action. On the one hand, the sovereign Lord, Krishna or Vishnu, is not under any compulsion, internal or external. So the production of the world is not impelled by the chain of logical necessity that inflexibly runs through these two premises. 2 plus 2 is 4, and 4 is greater than 3, to their conclusion, 2 plus 2 is greater than 4. We need a type of language which highlights not conceptual necessitation, but existential spontaneity, malleability, and fluidity. On the other hand, the Lord does not produce the world as a flippant gesture or as an unreflective event. This world-directed dynamism of the Lord, that is Krishna here, is said to be informed by consideration of the accumulated karmic merits and demerits of embodied selves. So the conclusion is that the world cannot bind the transcendental Lord, and yet the Lord may take delight, terms like rasa are used, in a type of voluntary binding to the human devotee. And the motive of Leela provides a conceptual space where we can begin to articulate this paradox of what I call God's quote-unquote structured spontaneity. In other words, the language of Leela makes possible a truly audacious theological claim that the Lord, who has no need whatsoever, yet somehow needs our loving response. And all this is the theological background, Atman, Brahman, and Leela, that will hopefully help us understand today the notions of theosis and poesis in Tagore's religious poetry. Tagore skillfully intermarried these pre-modern Sanskritic and vernacular Bengali idioms in speaking of God, Brahman, Krishna, Vishnu, with the languages of longing, desolation, separation, joyfulness, love, and fulfillment. One of his many claims to fame, and I always find this a remarkable claim, that he composed around 2,200 songs and composed the melodies for those songs as well. And 617 of these 2,000 and, I forget the name number, 200 songs are placed in a genre of devotional worship, puja, which articulate themes such as the quest for God, God as the true telos of all human striving, the incomparable sweetness of God who remains hidden in the human heart, the unbearable agony of feeling separated or distant from God, and so on. So across different songs of Tagore, and then sometimes different verses in the same song, the poet inhabits oscillating spirals of pain and consolation, of despair and hope, of restlessness and existential equipoise. And the multiple iterations of these spirals of reciprocity in Tagore's songs embody one key truth. Even though God remains intimately bound up with the world at all times, through a bondage that God undertakes voluntarily, God cannot be domesticated by the world's finitude. For the remainder of this talk, my exploration will proceed in two stages. First, I will outline a theological conundrum that Tagore inherited from the Vedantic Hindu cosmologies I have just now highlighted, namely, grappling with God who cannot be grasped, and comprehending God who cannot be comprehended. Second, in the light of these sketches, I will offer readings of some of his devotional songs where the interplay between the human self and the divine self becomes a dynamic locus of the world's manifestation. The interrelation between God and the world is shaped by the circuits of radiant love, along which God seeks out, and there we say it, God waits on the free response of individuals. And this deity-devotee affinity is structured, is played out in Tagore's songs through two lenses, which are perspectively distinct and yet deeply interrelated. So from one vantage point, God remains supremely sovereign over the world in and through which human beings are performing their return to God. From another vantage point, however, the metaphysically complete God who lacks nothing delightfully participates in devotional reciprocity with the devotee. Indeed, God waits on the devotee for their participatory return to the unfolding cosmic joy. And this dual perspective is embodied in the very first sentence, in the very first poem in the Gitanjali, the collection of poems for which Tagore received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913. And crucially, the Bengali poem from which this poem is translated has the term lila, which Tagore renders with a somewhat Victorian flourish as pleasure. Such is the nature of God's pleasure, Tagore suggests that God delights in lovingly reveling and God delights in making us what we can never become if we are left to our own devices. So God makes us a companion of God, lovingly reveling in and contributing to God's ongoing manifestation. So to put it bluntly, God makes us godlike as part of God's lila. And without this divine lila, or without this divine pleasure, God would not be God. Thus, the God who lacks nothing yet waits for our devotional response. And I will return to this poem towards the end. Now, this paradox I highlighted just now is cast in a distinctively devotional mold in a text called the Bhagavata Purana, where the motives of God's sovereignty and God's accessibility are intricately interwoven. And this notion of the accommodation of the deity to the finitude of the devotee is highlighted dramatically in a famous narrative where Mother Yashoda tells her infant Krishna that his playmates have complained that he has eaten some earth, and is then struck with awe when, on peering into his tiny mouth, she sees worlds upon worlds enfolded into his finitude. More specifically, we learn that Yashoda sees entities such as the sky, islands, oceans, the wind, the fire, the moon, and the stars, and perhaps most importantly, herself. Thus, in this vision of fractal-like reality in which each part is encompassed and replicated in the whole, not only does her infant microcosmically embody macrocosmic expanses, but he also contains her who is gazing at him. And bewildered by what she is seeing, she decides to surrender herself at his feet, considering him to be her transcendental refuge, when Krishna, through his cosmic power, Maya, makes her forget this vision, so that she again takes her infant on her lap with maternal affection. And this narrative ends with the remark that the supreme reality whose glories are recited in the scriptures was regarded by Yashoda simply as her son. And this theme of the finite world as a fitting habitation of the infinite reality is further elaborated in the paradigmatic narrative in the same text, Bhagavata Purana, of Krishna and the cowherd women, Gopi. One evening in autumn, when the charming full moon has risen in the sky, Krishna begins to play on his flute. So enthralling are the notes of the flute that the cowherd women leave behind their domestic chores and run to the middle of the forest to be with him. Some of them become filled with pride in thinking that they possess, they control Krishna, and suddenly Krishna disappears, plunging them into grief. Racked with pain, they begin to look for Krishna everywhere, this agonized quest during which they discern vivid signs of Krishna's absence everywhere is followed by their reunion with Krishna and their rejoicing when Krishna joins them in a circular dance. At the heart of these alterations lie the acute pain of separation, viraha, from the divine, and this theme is worked out extensively in the Vaishnava theological traditions as a soteriological means of attaining the divine presence. The argument works as follows. If God is present to us, we might mistakenly think that we possess or control God and become even oblivious to the divine presence in our midst. However, when God disappears from our vision, so painful is this absence to the supreme devotees that they single-mindedly focus their existential core on the absent God and on the absent God alone. So absence becomes a form of hyperpresence. Thus, somewhat paradoxically, the absence of God is soteriologically more powerful than the presence of God in drawing devotees nearer to God. In divine presence, the complacent devotee may be filled with egocentric satisfaction. But in absence, the grief-struck devotee may become wholeheartedly riveted on God in a spiritual alchemy of love. And one implication of this paradox is that in the case of the supreme devotees of Krishna, such as these gopis, the cowherd women, the more intimately they feel Krishna's presence, the more painfully they become aware of Krishna's absence. And the more agonizingly they are torn apart by the pain of Krishna's absence, the deeper they can move towards the hidden radiance of Krishna's presence. They aspire to contain Krishna within their earthly habitations, and yet this is a spiritual longing, a spiritual hunger that cannot be satisfied in worldly circumstances, because the infinite cannot be encapsulated in the bounds of the finite. Thus, the revealed Krishna is also the hidden Krishna, as much as the hidden Krishna contains the soteriological potentiality of moving towards the revealed Krishna. And the supremely personal Krishna engages in this spiraling dance of absence in presence and presence in absence with the devotees. Thus, to push the paradox to its breaking point, Krishna's presence is Krishna's absence. Let us now turn to some songs from Tagore, who creatively reworked these Vaishnava themes into his poems and songs, even if the divinity is usually not named as Krishna in his songs. Tagore often articulates the motive of a cosmic congruence or harmony, samanjasya in Bengali, between the finite self and the divine self in the Leela of love, where the human devotee and the divine lover are bound up together. And is elaborating this paradox of the sovereign ruler of the universe who voluntarily undergoes a form of self-abasement before human devotees. Tagore quotes the Hindu poet Jnana Dasa, who says to God that he wishes to share with God the divine pain of separation. Viraha Vedana. I'm your loving wife. What shame do I have, O Lord? Make me feel all your pain night and day. If there's no sleep in your eyes, why should I remain asleep? The world is your vast home. I too am dissolved in that world. Tagore also quotes an English poet, Edmund Home. So on the left-hand side is my translation from the Bengali, but that is the English in itself. Writing that we hear in the idioms of people from other lands, that is in this case England, certain echoes of the audacity with which Hindu texts on devotional love, bhakti, declare that the desire of God for us stands waiting for us at the door of our own desire. So it would be an interesting case to see if he had read Thomas Traherne. I don't know. Thou, that is God, you have need of thy meanest creature. Thou hast need of what was once thine in some primordial stage. The thirst that consumes me, my devotee, a spirit, is the thirst of your God's heart for mine. So indeed for Tagore, without the free response of human beings, the divine love itself would remain incomplete. So Tagore does not hesitate to say that. The desire of the divine for us is infinite and is expressed in natural beauty and issues a call to us to move towards the infinite ocean of the divine heart. We were once inside the divine heart or within the divine heart, but have now become separated from it. And the divine heart is calling us to calling us to return along the path of suffering so that a heart-to-heart union with God can be completed. And because of the presence of this cosmic pain of separation in the infinite, such a pain of separation is also present in us who were once in the infinite. I will now highlight how the Leela of love is elaborated in some of Tagore's devotional songs. Unfortunately, I only have 10 of these handouts. So maybe some of you can maybe share between you. So I think there are about 15 of us here. I have one. And here is one more. Maybe, maybe you can take one if you want. Okay, so I will now, as I say, take you through some of these translations. And let's start with number one. So I return to the first song of the English Gitanjali, as I said I would. This is a clear articulation of the paradox of God accommodating God's self to human conditions. God, who is endless, wishes to engage in the Leela with a human devotee. And for this Leela to be endless, God has to endlessly empty the devotee and revitalize the devotee. Thus, every emptying of God is a prelude to a self-restoration, which is itself oriented to another emptying. Thus, at the end of one iteration of the Leela, we only stand at the threshold of another iteration. Thus, God's Leela is not over, and the poet declares, I only continue to sing. You have made me endless, such is your Leela. Emptying me, you have again filled me with new life. On so many hills and so many river shores, you have roamed, carrying this little flute, playing again and again so many notes. To whom can I ever tell? And at your immortal touch, my little heart loses itself in supreme joy and breaks out in song. Filling up only my little fist, you give to me day and night. Countless ages pass, and yet you are not finished. I only continue to seek. The next two Psalms 2 and 3 highlight the motive of God's self-abasement before the devotee. You came down from the seat of your throne. Pausing, you stood at the door of my lonely home, Lord. Sitting by myself, I was singing my own song. The tune caught your ear. You came down. Pausing, you stood at the door of my lonely home, Lord. At your court, there is so much singing. There are so many masters. This amateur song came alive today in your love. A piteous stone was struck in the midst of the world melody. You came down with a garden of honor in your hands. Pausing, you stood at the door of my lonely home. Number 3. Infinite is your wealth, yet you are not satisfied with that infinite wealth. You wish to take it from my hands, bit by bit. Giving away your jewels, you have made me rich. Now you come calling at my door, the door that is kept shut by me. You would make yourself the giver, and you would make me the beggar. The whole world is delirious with luster. You do not stay on that chariot. You have come down to the dusty path. You will walk with me through all the ages. Next, Song 4, which happens to be one of the most well-known songs of Tagore's songs, is a clear articulation of the motive of God's condescension to the heart of the devotee in a declaration of theological audacity. The poet says that without the devotee, God's love would have remained unfulfilled. And as song number 5 indicates, the fulfillment of God's love takes place precisely through the life of the devotee. By giving God's self to the devotee, God beholds the unfurling of divine life within the devotee. So whereas Mother Yashoda in that picture sees herself in the God infant's mouth in a theological reversal, here God wishes to hear God-inspired songs through the ears of the human poet. So number 4, thus is your joy with me. This is why you have come down to me. Without me, O Lord of the three worlds, your love would have been in vain. With me, you have started this fair. Delight plays in my heart. Your own will takes varied forms and ripples through my life. Thus it is you, O King of Kings. Thus you, the King of Kings, roam through my heart in captivating attire. Lord, you are always awake. Thus, O Lord, you have come down to me. Your love is in the heart. Your love is in the love of the devotee's heart. There, in the devotee's heart, your form in the union of the two is expressed in its fullness. And the fifth one, a very nice articulation of what we may call panentheism. O my Lord, filling up my body and life, what nectar is it that you wish to drink? This picture of your world in my eyes, you seek to observe my poet, that is poet with a capital P. Silently dwelling in my enchanted ears, you wish to hear your own songs. Your creation composes in my mind your own varied forms. Your love, O Lord, mingles with them and awakens all my songs. You gaze at me in your sweet delight by giving yourself unto me as your gift. In the next two songs, number 6 and 7, the poet's mood shifts from joyfulness at God's presence to suffering and anguish at God's absence. At the end of the night, who has brought to me in secret the jewel of your pain of separation? I will keep in my heart that gift of sorrow so that I do not lose it in the complicated tasks of the day. Let it sway in my heart, overcoming all worry. This eternal sorrow will be my eternal treasure and will be fulfilled in my final worship. Let it glow in secret in the dense darkness of the night filled with dreams when I am bewildered, for that is your silent call unto me. Number 7, across the space of separation between you and me, how many more bridges do I have to build with tunes and melodies? Yet as sorrow strikes in secret in my heart, call out to me to serve you in this time at the hour of dusk. I stay away from the world in the inner quarters of the heart. My mind is enveloped by webs of dreamy thought. Joys and sorrows are mine alone, and that burden grows heavy. May I be able to surrender them on the tray of true worship. The next 5 songs, 8 to 12, are different variations on the theme of progressive attunement to God. So we read variously that God has arrived with a fiery thunder, decentering the heart from a circle of egoistic concerns and reorienting it towards God. And this recalibration is a painful purgation. But as the human divine Leela progresses, the devotee becomes rooted in and stabilized in God's perfect love. The pain was indeed terrible when you were tuning the strings. Play the veena, make me forget all sorrowful things. What had remained hidden in your mind, that is God's mind, all in your mind all these days, let me hear it today on my strings. Do not delay any longer. The lamp is going out. The night waits at the door, listening. The tune that you, God, set to star after star in a never-ending stream of fire, play out your restlessness, not the restlessness of the devotee, in my heart with that tune. Number 9, from where does it strike? Alas, this torment of love. Slowly and slowly, I think that my friend, that is with a capital F friend, comes to the darkened courtyard of my heart. Cast aside all your poverty. Wake up in joy, my heart. Light all your lamps, light them, call out eagerly, come, my dearest beloved. And today I will exchange my pride, my ahankara, my egoism with your garland. At the closing of the night, let me end the story of tears. I have thrown away to the wayside my hard heart. Your feet will give it a sweet touch that melts stone. I had darkness around me, but you pulled it away. Your love came as fire and illuminated it. That I, Ami, was to me the most valuable thing. I have exhausted it today in bedecking your ceremonial tray. 11. You play different tunes on your flute in the day. So as I noted in my talk, Krishna is not named, but you can say because the flute player of Krishna in the background. Your songs touched my heart, but you remained away. I asked wayfarers, who is playing on this flute? They confuse me with different names, and I go to many doors. Now the sky is dim, the tired day closes its eye, that is the sun. If you send me back to the roads, I will die in futile search. Leave the outside world and lay a seat for yourself inside. Come and play your flute in my soul's inner home. And the last one, when I was blind, time passed by in games, in the lila of happiness. But I did not find true joy, Ananda. I set up walls around my playhouse and I was lost in my own fancies. When you came into the house, breaking the foundations, my bondage ended. Games of happiness do not delight me anymore. I have found joy. My terrible, my horrific, my Pishon Lord, my destroyer, my little sleep has left me. With sharp pain you set anew my rhythms. The day you came in a fiery dress and took away all I had, that day I became whole. All my conflicts were dispelled. Beyond sorrow and happiness, I have found you, true joy. So that is the end.
Oh, thank you. It was very inspiring to hear the wonderful poetry of Tagore. I believe the first Indian to receive the Nobel.
Yes, in 1913.
Yeah. Absolutely major poet, and I think that was very helpful the way you set out the background in the Vaishnava Vedanta and the Bhakti tradition. Questions for Ankur?
Yes.
I really loved the paradox that you zeroed in on for a while about the presence being an absence and the absence being presence. And I was wondering if you think there's any fair analogy to that in the Western religious traditions with prophets when God has not spoken to them.
I mean, there is not just a simile or an analogy. There is a book on this topic by Professor Francis Clooney.
Oh, I know Francis Clooney.
Yeah, and the title of his book is His Hidden Places Darkness. I think it's a verse from the Hebrew Bible. I forget the precise title. And he talks about theopoetics in the Christian tradition and in some of these Vaishnava poets. So you not only have an analogy, you have a book on that topic.
Oh, wonderful.
But to answer your question, nevertheless, yes. So we find this similar idea of the dark night of the soul, to use that phrase. The idea is that even when God has seemingly gone away from us, we have to remember that God is omnipresent, and yet God cannot metaphysically desert us. So this feeling of being separated from God is a form of unknowing, and we have to purify this unknowing through pain. And the idea is that pain will help us to get to God more than joy somehow. Because in joy, we just forget. It's like so beautiful and I'm having a good time. Where is God? I don't need God. But it is in moments of pain and suffering, when I'm shattered, I'm fragmented, I'm broken, then I begin to see light not only at the end of the tunnel, but also in the middle of the tunnel.
Is that a bit like Tolstoy in that sense, in the Confessions?
Yeah. So, I mean, all these ideas are very deeply resonant with one another. This idea that it is in the dark night of the soul, I begin to find the true light.
Also, you touched, I thought, in a very interesting way on some of these paradoxes that I think the medieval mystics hint at. The paradox of the God who needs nothing, actually seeking the loving response of the worshipper.
Yeah. And in fact, that was the fourth poem that I was translating. And, I have a friend, he is a student of physics, and he's not very interested in theology or in God, but he once said to me that song by Tagore, that is what I mean by God. So that song had this profound impact on him, this idea that although God is absolutely sovereign and does not need us in any metaphysical sense of need or want, yet the language of Leela is so much necessary even, because it makes possible that way of speaking. That somehow, I don't know how, it is part of the divine mystery that God, without losing God's sovereignty, voluntarily binds God to human finitude. And that is the narrative that I was highlighting there of Yashoda seeing her infant and seeing herself in the mouth of the infant. This kind of a fractal-like resonance between the finite and the non-finite. So yes, I mean, somehow the language of Leela does not quite answer the question because this is not a problem to be solved. It's more of a mystery to be inhabited. But that concept makes possible a certain style of speaking, which is very natural and common in Hindu devotional texts. Whereas in certain Christian contexts, if you started talking like that, you'll be like, oh, but what about God's absolute plenitude? Don't you know that God does not need you? Don't you know that you are just a creature? Are you not violating this borderline between humanity and divinity? Whereas Leela gives you this theological license. Just go ahead and say what you want about God. And God needs you. God, in fact, there is one verse in the Bhagavata Purana where the verse goes like this, that regarding the supreme devotees, the supreme lovers of God, God binds God with ropes to the feet of the devotees. Now that is, theological paradox, right? I mean, because when the text is speaking like that, the text is not saying that God is just your best buddy, that God is just a human being. God is the supreme controller of samsara. God is not in space. God is not in time. God is not subject to any of the imperfections of samsara as we are. And yet, somehow the text is able to find the theological space to say that God binds God's self to the devotee with ropes of love. So that is a bondage, which is the highest freedom.
Yes, well, indeed, these similarities are striking, especially if we realize that there was no possible influence. The Vaishnava tradition is it like 17th century or earlier?
No, I mean, in some of its developments, we can date it at about, say, the 10th or the 9th century.
Okay, yeah.
But their foundational texts go even further back to about the 3rd century BCE.
I realize that, but the fully formed is medieval. Yes, well, even the concept of Leela in medieval mysticism, there is the term ludus amoris, which means the play of love or the game of love. And these mystics are also describing God or Christ as playing with them, so withdrawing in order to make them long for him more, than approaching them and then withdrawing again. So it's a very painful, but it's still a game or a play. And exactly the same reason is given, so in order to make us love him more. So this is a striking similarity, which I would describe only to a common kind of experience, the bhakti experience. And from a Christian perspective, it seems like that there is a premonition of incarnation here with these beautiful images you mentioned. Of course, in the Christian perspective, this is the Son of God who becomes a slave, who washes feet of his disciples. So the idea of self-humiliation, right, out of love, this is a very striking thing. But my question would be about Advaita, Vedanta, and Bhakti. So I was shocked almost some time ago when I read poems by Ramana Maharshi, because Ramana Maharshi was an Advaitist in Shankara's way. So for him, there was no distinction between God and soul. And yet he wrote these poems about longing and love. So what is how can you be a Bhakti and to be an Advaitist in the Shankara tradition?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. And now we're going to go quite deep into Vedantic hermeneutics. And roughly the answer is this, that a lot, and not just what you're reporting is the case not only for Ramana Maharshi, but for many other Hindu writers, thinkers who identify as people in the Advaita tradition. For them, symbolic poetry is performing a soteriological role of the realization of non-duality. So long as you do not regard the beloved as metaphysically distinct from you, but the beloved as your fundamental innermost true self, you can use the language of love and remove from the language of love the notion of duality. So I mean, you can keep on pushing and pushing and pushing the language of love to the breaking point where you say to the beloved that you are not in any way distinct from me in the most ontological sense of non-distinction. Now, if you can do that, of course, it's an if, and we may or may not agree, but the claim from Ramana's point of view is that the true meaning of love is that breaking point.
Yeah.
Yes. So you would use the language of love because of its symbolic power, because of its affective power, to take you to the realization of this ontological non-duality. Right? So, which is quite distinct from what a human lover may say to the beloved. I mean, the human lover may also say, without being a member of Advaita tradition, that you, my beloved, are entirely, absolutely me.
Yeah.
When a human lover says that, they do not usually have in mind Shankara's Advaita. Then you, my beloved, are absolutely me, I am absolutely you. So that is a language not of absolute union, but some kind of devotional communion.
Yes.
But for Ramana and many other thinkers in the Advaita tradition, the language of love can be skillfully calibrated towards the realization of this non-duality.
Yeah.
And to give you a very quick parallel, a similar question would be in the case of somebody like Plotinus. I mean, is it monism or monotheism, let's say? I mean, do we have
This is theism.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I had this discussion with John Vervecki. Is it possible, if you love someone, is it possible really to believe metaphysically that there is no distinction and still love this person as possessing agency and freedom? This is an interesting question because, of course, you can use the language of love as these non-dualists, but who loves who?
Who loves who? Yeah.
So, thank you for your talk. This notion, I'll probably mispronounce it. Is it Lila or
Yeah, Lila.
Lila is
Yeah.
So it sounds to my ears very similar to a position that several Anglo-American philosophers are sort of converging on. Harry Frankfurt in Reasons for Love, John Searle's Reason and Action. But I'll use Frankfurt's term. He talks about how both love and reason have what he calls a voluntary necessity to them. An argument is compelling, but it's not compulsive. When you love someone, you feel they can do no other, but you feel like you're acting freely and really of choice. And the point they're making is our relationship to the normative, to the true, the good, the beautiful, is always one of voluntary necessity. It's somehow binding on us, but it doesn't. It enhances our agency rather than robbing our agency. Is that notion of voluntary necessity that because what they're doing is they're trying to get at what's the heart of our experience, our phenomenology of normativity. Does that sound like it's landing anywhere near this notion?
Well, not just anywhere near. That is the heart of the notion here, right? So let's say we use a phrase like the lure of love, right? And love is a lure because it is going to revitalize a certain aesthetic sentiment in the heart, which is garment, and the term for that is rasa. So the claim is that there are all these sentiments which are latent and dormant, and love can revitalize those sentiments of delight in your heart so that you will freely become bound to the beloved. So in this bondage to the beloved in love, you do not characterize this bondage as bondage. You characterize this bondage as the true freedom that you seek.
So just one quick follow-up that it sounds like it does land, so thank you for that. Is the notion of so I hear it being extended to play and to love and to beauty. Is it ever extended to reason in this tradition? Because this is what, like Frankfurt and Searle, they're saying we also find it at the heart of reason, properly understood.
So here, I mean, when I use the language of the heart, I'm not using it, of course, in the sense of the human heart, which is a physical organ. I'm using it in the theological, symbolic sense of the center of human agency, human volition, human moral agency. So these traditions will not make sharp distinctions between the reason and effect. So the cognitive and the volitional and the conative, all these dimensions are deeply interwoven. So what would apply to my volitional life in love would also apply to the life of the mind.
Great. Thank you. That's very helpful, very clarifying.
And do you have a question? Look.
Well, building on John's question, what is the closest concept to Leela in the Western tradition that you're aware of? This playful creativity.
So if I may again answer a question with the name of a book, our PhD student,
Our joint
Daniel,
PhD student.
our joint PhD student, whose name is Daniel Soares. He has published a book with the title God at Play, Leela in Hindu and Christian Traditions. So there's a full book out there on this very, very topic. But your question was, what is the closest equivalent? And in my talk, I suggested one equivalent, this phrase, structured spontaneity, which is not a transition in the sense of an isomorphic one-to-one. So Leela is not quite play, it's not quite playfulness, it's not quite grace, a term with many meanings. What I mean by structured spontaneity is this. We may think of structure and spontaneity as bipolar opposites, but think of a way of being in the world where structure and spontaneity are not only not opposed, but deeply interwoven. So here's one example. I have been trying to play Beethoven, a certain symphony, and I've been doing it for 15 years, 18 years, 20 years, 25 years, right? And when I play on it, you're like, wow, look at this guy. He's doing it so spontaneously. He knows the whole thing. But why am I able to do it? Why do I have this spontaneity? Because it has been structured by 25 years of rigorous, meticulous, painful exercise. So that structured spontaneity is what I will conceptually paraphrase, not translate. Because as I say, every translation is an interpretation. Some people do translate the word Leela as play. And that has can have the implication that, oh, God is just playing with you. You are just playthings of the gods. So we are not playthings of the gods in that sense of playing. It is a very it is a very serious kind of play. You know, it is play that is very serious. Yeah, and that is your phrase. Yes.
Well, structured spontaneity is how Csikszentmihalyi's notion of flow is frequently described. Because when you're flowing, you feel like it's effortless, but it's not impulsive or clumsy. It is perfectly fitted. It is well fitted and structured, but it's flowing from you.
Yeah. And the point I was trying to make is that for a poet like Rabindranath Tagore, building on these pre-modern Sanskritic idioms, Theosis is Leela. So the process of becoming divine, becoming godlike, involves this constant ongoing reciprocity, this idea of becoming godlike, losing your godlike status, regaining your godlike status, losing your godlike status. And why is that the case? Because we are finite beings. We are not the non-finite absolute.
But that what you just did there, that's not just sort of rote repetition. There's change, right? Every time.
Change.
So there's like a reciprocal opening. Yes.
And the reciprocal opening is a bit like what my friend here was saying, that say on day one, I love God only this much. On day two, I love God a little bit more. On day three, I lose God even more. And on day four, I again don't go back to square one. I start from where I was, right? So the idea is that the more you love God, the more you are pained by God's love. Because the more you know how much more of God you cannot have in worldly conditions.
You should see my talk, man.
Some of them are online, are they not?
Right?
Some of them are online, I believe.
No, but I meant the one I gave here yesterday.
Oh, I see. Oh, yes. Yeah. Matthew.
Yes. So I've got a question. So you talk about sort of waxing and waning in your pursuit of God.
Yeah, waxing and waning the God.
Yes, exactly. So I was wondering, what does this whole idea come from the kind of eschatological horizon of some kind, like a completion state, at which sort of you can say, well, I've arrived, right?
So in different styles of Vedanta, what happens in the hereafter, what is the ultimate fulfillment, varies. But in the form of Vedanta I'm talking about, then the idea is that our completion will be in some kind of paradise where this process is going on all the time.
Right. Okay.
This process will never come to an end, where you will say, I've completely found God. So even in paradise, this process of a reciprocation of finding yet more of God. Right? So let's put it this way. Here in samsara on earth, we are somehow traveling towards God. In heaven, whatever is that heaven, we'll be traveling in God. Right? So now we're traveling towards God, who, let's say, in some sense is in the other room. But once we are with God, there's no more traveling to God, right? But we will still have to travel in God, because this kind of a spiral will not come to an end.
Yeah, that reminds me a bit of like the sort of eternal state of the sort of saints or the angels and things.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And from this perspective, these gopis are those angels, like quasi angels. Yeah.
Doesn't Gregory Nyssa have like a notion of perpetual trend?
Epectasis.
Perpetual.
Because God is infinite, we will infinitely run after him. But it's also this idea in many Christian mystics, for instance, Saint Teresa of Avila, she speaks about sweet wound. So the pain becomes pleasurable and sweet, and it's at the same time pain and then pleasure of love. And C.S. Lewis, he had a similar idea that even in heaven, the saints, because we are selfish by nature, overcoming our selfishness is always some kind of effort and pain. So even in heaven, we will give away ourselves to God with this almost like dynamic of pain, which makes us even more happy. So yeah.
Any further questions?
I was wondering whether similar ideas can be found in Plato, for example, in the Symposium, about Lila, the play, the love. I thought about Socrates being this embodiment of Dionysian principle.
Yeah.
And because at the end of the Symposium, he judges a tragic poet and a comic poet as this embodiment of Dionysus. This is a philosophic Dionysus, which embodies this highest principle of love, of eros, of play. This lens.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's the possible reading. But to go back to what I was saying earlier, I mean, then one may even say that the Dionysian and the Apollinarian are not opposed, but somehow deeply interwoven in Lila. So you don't have to choose between your mind and your heart. So it's a mind and heart combined, the locus.
And there's an almost completely irrelevant side. The god Dionysus was considered to be the Indian god.
Shiva.
Yes, yeah. And of course, Alexander even finds a city that he city of Dionysus. But I think this is an appropriate moment to thank our speaker for an inspiring and brilliant talk. Thank you. Just in terms of our housekeeping, so the plan is to have a concluding discussion, but I suspect that some are thirsting, if not for more spiritual realities, perhaps the
Spirits.
And for spirits.
Exactly, yeah, since we've been invoking the god of wine. So we will have this now the opportunity for a concluding discussion, and anybody who wishes to come along to the grantor, then is most welcome to.
So what time do we have the booking?
We're currently booked in there at 4, but
4.
Yeah.
I think
Because I had this idea to go to the choral evensong at King's.
Yes, which will start at
5:30.
5:30. Yes,
Okay.
it's achievable.
I think that's achievable.
Well, so Granta first and
Yeah,
evensong,
mean,
and then come back to
maybe.
Granta.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to mention, in case anybody's interested, Zach has rented with me. He's rented it, but Zach and I are sharing a big Airbnb for the sake of a possible soiree for after the pub, in case the conversation is good enough, and so maybe there's an opportunity to go back after the choral event.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a definitely agreeable option. Thank you very much, Christoph. If that's
And because Christoph didn't mention it, I will. He has brought along 2 beautiful bottles of rosé to share. So
And 2 liters of gin.
Perhaps it's a good time for us to thank Douglas and Ben.
Yeah.
Well, Ben did all the hard work. I decided to, enjoy the fruits of it. So, any just final concluding thoughts? I found this an immensely helpful and rich experience, and it certainly brought different perspectives of this important topic together for me. But I just wonder whether there are sort of informal, these don't need to be scholarly comments, but just thoughts.
Yeah, I found this just invaluable because, as some of you know, I'm about to go out on this long quest journey, and I'm trying to, I'm sort of like in the sense we were talking about, playing with the idea of trying to get theosis, moksha, and satori in a deep dialogue with each other. This conference was just enormously helpful for me to get much clearer about the multifaceted nature and depth of theosis. So I'm extremely grateful.
And I just want to add, if that's okay, a concluding thought for me. I was only here today, but I share in the gratitude, which is quite profound on my end. But I also was really captivated by the last two talks, how they kind of pointed us in the direction of not only humans participating in the divine nature, but the divine participating in human nature in a certain way. And how that reciprocity might be a kind of element of theosis is very interesting to me.
Yes, it's been an extraordinary pleasure to be among you. I've been to my fair share of academic conferences, but I'd never been to one where there was a spiritual dimension to the scholarship, the way that I felt here, that each of the presentations, there was something very important at stake, something important to the soul. And I've been very much enriched by feeling the goodness of all your hearts. So it's been extraordinary to learn and commune with you.
Well, I'm not sure I can get any better than that. Sure things to close to.
I just want to say that, well, I share the same experience, I guess, that yes, there was a spiritual dimension, an academic intellectual dimension. This is how conferences should look like, and I think we're striving, Douglas, to achieve that really, and continue with creating this community that can be really academic and really spiritual at the same time. As you probably noticed from what I was saying, I don't think that all religions are equal and all religions have paths to the same end. I don't believe that, but at the same time, I think there is a profound sympathy, sympatheia, or there are some, because we are all human, and I think we have one God and one source of everything. And this is very, very enriching and interesting to me to see the similarities between different traditions and the differences, and to be able to freely discuss that without any sense that anyone wants to convert someone else, in some manipulative way or overtly imposing way. But at the same time, it's not this sort of new agey, we are one, all religions are one, this is wonderful, and let's hold our hands. So this is something very precious, because it's very difficult, that we can really differ, we can disagree, but at the same time, we feel united by something, by truth, I guess. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Stay in touch.
Can I just say, given that Christianity across
Yeah, where and didn't get around to talking about it. So
Yeah.
So we shall